I never thought that an ordinary wedding would turn into a disaster. And this is what happened. It was a Friday evening, and our small apartment buzzed with a mix of excitement and tension. The weathered suitcase I'd borrowed from my brother sat open on the bed, half filled with neatly folded clothes and an array of sunscreen bottles. This trip had been my idea, a lifeline, or so I thought. For months, Sarah had been teetering on the edge of something I couldn't quite grasp. Her once bright eyes now carried storms, her voice cracking under the weight of everyday stresses. She deserved this break. We both did. Yet, as we packed, the cracks in her composure seemed to widen. "Where's my hairbrush?" "The one I told you to leave out," she snapped from the bathroom. I hesitated, glancing around the room. "It's probably in the drawer where you left it." She stormed past me, her eyes darting with suspicion, and rifled through the drawer. "You moved it, didn't you? I can never find anything because of you." I bit my tongue, knowing better than to fan the flames. The clock on the nightstand blinked ominously, reminding me that our midnight flight was creeping closer. She needed this escape, this reprieve from the weight she carried. And if it meant swallowing my frustration, I'd do it. By the time we zipped up the last suitcase, Sarah's face softened, almost as though the thought of turquoise waters and salty air had loosened her clenched fists. She even smiled, a rare, genuine thing these days. But then her phone buzzed. It was faint at first, like a mosquito's hum, but it came again and again. She glanced at the screen, her hand trembling as she picked it up. I watched as the blood drained from her face, her lips pressing into a thin line. Then, without a word, she dropped the phone as if it burned her. "Everything okay?" I ventured. "Fine," she said too quickly, snatching the phone up again. "It's nothing." Her fingers danced across the screen as she typed furiously, her shoulders hunched like she was bracing against a storm. My stomach twisted in knots, the air around us thickening. Before I could ask anything more, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Lisa, my wife's former best friend. "Hey, is Sarah with you?" "She's not answering her phone." Lisa's voice chirped through the speaker. "I wanted to remind you both about our wedding on Sunday. You're coming, right?" I pinched the bridge of my nose. "We got a flight tonight, Lisa." "Sorry, but—" "Oh, come on. It's my wedding. You can't miss it." I forced a polite laugh, stalling until she hung up. When I looked up, Sarah was staring at me, her eyes sharp with something I couldn't name. "What did she want?" she demanded, her voice rising. I explained the call, expecting her to roll her eyes or shrug it off. Instead, her reaction startled me. Her cheeks flushed red, and she slammed her suitcase shut with a force that rattled the bed frame. "Why the hell did you pick up?" she barked. "Now she'll just keep bothering us." Her anger was misplaced, that much I knew. But as the seconds ticked by, her anger didn't subside. If anything, it grew, and the more I tried to calm her, the more my own unease began to swell. Something was wrong, something I couldn't name, but it was there. And I had the sinking feeling it wasn't just about a missed wedding. Her scream came out of nowhere, sharp and slicing through the room like glass shattering against tile. "Why did you even take her call?" Sarah stood in front of me, her fists clenched at her sides, her chest heaving. "Why would you do that? You know how I feel about her. She's a traitor." "I didn't take her phone, Sarah," I replied, baffled by the accusation. "She called me. I knew she was getting married on Sunday. It's not like I was trying to." "You don't understand," she yelled, her voice cracking. Her face was flushed, and her eyes shone with an intensity that made me take a half step back. "I don't want to go to that stupid wedding. After everything Lisa did to me, I can't believe she even had the nerve to invite us. She's a traitor. Do you hear me? A traitor." Her words came out rapid fire, each one laden with anger that seemed disproportionate to the situation. My thoughts raced, trying to piece together what she meant. Traitor? What could Lisa have done that was so unforgivable? And why had Sarah never mentioned this before? "All I want," she continued, her voice softening but no less desperate, "is to go to the seaside. Just the two of us. To leave everything behind. To leave her behind. Let's just go, okay? No wedding, no drama. Just us." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, all I could hear was the faint hum of the clock on the wall. I didn't know what to say. If we go to the wedding, Sarah will be very angry. If we go to the sea, Lisa will be very angry because she is counting on us. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to buy myself a moment to think. Sarah's gaze bore into me, a mix of expectation and desperation in her eyes. Finally, I let out a breath and said, "Okay, we'll go to the seaside. We have 4 hours until the flight, so let's just wait for it." Her shoulders sagged with relief. "Good," she said almost to herself before walking out of the room. I watched as she disappeared down the hallway, the door to the bedroom clicking shut behind her. I turned back to the TV, but I couldn't focus on the images flickering across the screen. My mind was elsewhere, tangled up in the weight of her words. From down the hall, I caught the faint sound of her voice. She was talking to herself, and though I couldn't make out every word, one sentence came through loud and clear. "What else? Go to that stupid Lisa's wedding? No way. Never in a million years." The bitterness in her tone made me uneasy, but I forced myself to ignore it. 2 hours passed in a blur of static-filled TV and restless pacing. Just as I was starting to wonder if I should check on her, Sarah emerged from the bedroom. Her face was calm now, almost serene, and her eyes sparkled with an energy that hadn't been there before. "You know," she said, her voice light and almost playful, "I've been thinking. I haven't been to a wedding in ages. It might be fun." I blinked, unsure I'd heard her correctly. "What?" "The wedding," she said, as if it were obvious. "Let's go to Lisa's wedding." For a moment, I was too stunned to respond. "But Sarah, we already decided," I said carefully. "We have tickets. We're going to the seaside. If we don't go, it's like throwing $1,500 away." "Just gone?" She shrugged, her lips curling into a thin smile. "I don't care. I want to go to the wedding. That's final." Her words hit me like a gut punch. How could she switch gears so suddenly, so completely, after everything she'd just said? I stared at her, searching her face for some clue, some sign that this was a joke. But it wasn't. Her eyes were steady, her expression firm. "Sarah," I began, my voice barely above a whisper. "You were the one who said—" "I know what I said," she snapped, cutting me off. "But I've changed my mind. I want to go to the wedding. It's important to me." The look she gave me was one I knew all too well. The look that said arguing would only make things worse. Still, the words were out before I could stop them. "And the tickets? What about the $1,500? "I don't care," she shouted, her voice rising again. "I don't care about the money or the tickets or the stupid seaside. We're going to the wedding, and that's it." I stared at her, the weight of the decision crushing down on me. No matter what I chose, someone would end up hurt. But the way she looked at me now, with an intensity that bordered on fury, made it clear there was only one real option. "Fine," I said, my voice hollow. "We'll go to the wedding." Sarah's face broke into a triumphant smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. And as I watched her turn and walk away, the pit in my stomach only grew deeper. What had I just agreed to? By the time the sun dipped below the horizon that night, I was already tangled in my thoughts. Sarah's sudden change of heart gnawed at me. Hours ago, she'd been adamant about avoiding Lisa's wedding, railing against her with a venom I rarely saw. And now, without warning, she'd done a complete about-face. Why? It didn't make sense, but I tried to brush it off. After all, what could she possibly do at a crowded wedding? Maybe she'd realized how childish her words had sounded and wanted to make amends. Or maybe she just didn't want to waste the money on the vacation. Still, a nagging unease settled in my chest. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling as shadows from passing cars danced across the room. Sarah, beside me, was silent but restless, her breathing uneven. I thought about the things she'd said earlier, her sharp words about Lisa. Traitor, she called her. The malice in her voice had been palpable. My mind drifted back to her laughable certainty that she'd never attend the wedding. What had changed? Eventually, exhaustion overtook my spinning thoughts, and I drifted into a shallow, uneasy sleep. When I woke the next morning, the first thing I noticed was that Sarah wasn't in bed. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if the events of the previous day had all been a strange, feverish dream. But then I heard a faint rustling, followed by the soft clink of hangers. I turned my head toward the wardrobe. where Sarah sat cross-legged, surrounded by a chaotic swirl of clothes. She was holding up two dresses, one in each hand, a sleek black gown and a flowing white one. Her brow furrowed as if the decision carried the weight of the world. When she noticed me stirring, she didn't greet me or say good morning. Instead, she turned to me with a measured tone. "What should I wear?" she asked. "The white dress or the black one?" I blinked, still groggy, unsure how to respond. "The black one," I said, stifling a yawn. It was the more appropriate choice for a wedding, I thought, even if I didn't fully understand the importance of the question. "Yeah, then I'll take the white one," she said, setting the black dress aside with an air of finality. "What?" I said, confused. She didn't answer, instead standing to examine herself in the mirror with the white dress pressed against her body. I didn't have the energy to argue, so I left her to it and went to make coffee, wondering once again what had gotten into her. At noon, we left to run a few errands before heading to the wedding. Sarah insisted we stop to buy an envelope for the cash gift. I'd expected to handle the money myself, but she was unusually insistent that she be the one to place it in the envelope. "I'll take care of it," she said, clutching the envelope like a lifeline. Her tone brooked no argument. Her eagerness struck me as odd, but I relented. "All right," I said, handing her the cash. "Make sure it's $800. We arrived home, and as I stepped into the shower, Sarah called out, her voice carrying over the sound of the water. "How much should I put in the envelope?" she asked, as though we hadn't just discussed this. "800. I yelled back. "Okay," she replied, her voice cheerful. When I stepped out of the shower, my unease returned. Something about the exchange didn't sit right. Why had she asked me again? Sarah never forgot a figure when it came to money. As I toweled off, an unsettling thought formed in my mind. What if she hadn't put the money in at all? Still dripping, I hurried to the envelope. It lay sealed on the kitchen counter where she'd left it. Glancing over my shoulder to make sure she wasn't nearby, I peeled it open. My breath caught in my throat. Inside was not the neat stack of $100 bills I'd given her, but a torn piece of A4 paper. Scrawled across it in bold, angry letters was a single message. "Fuck you, Lisa." For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the crude note as the realization sank in. This was why Sarah had been so insistent about handling the money. This was why she'd fought to take control of the envelope. I could feel the blood draining from my face as 1,000 scenarios ran through my head. If I hadn't checked, Lisa would have opened this envelope in front of everyone. The thought of the humiliation, the fallout, made my stomach churn. I moved quickly, swapping the note for the cash, and resealing the envelope with trembling hands. My heart pounded in my chest as I placed it back on the counter, exactly as it had been. A moment later, Sarah walked in, her makeup flawless and her white dress billowing softly as she moved. "Ready?" she asked, her voice sweet as honey. "Yeah," I said, barely meeting her eyes. I now understood why she'd wanted to go to the wedding so badly. But what I didn't understand, what chilled me to my core, was how far she was willing to go to settle whatever grudge she held against Lisa. The day hadn't even started, and I already dreaded what lay ahead. Dinner had been uneventful, but the night was anything but. I woke up in the dark, drenched in sweat, heart racing as if I'd run a marathon. The nightmare was a blur, but the fear it left in its wake was sharp, like the edge of a blade. In the dream, I was at Lisa's wedding. Everything was shrouded in an eerie fog. The laughter and music warped into haunting echoes. Sarah stood at the center of the crowd, her white dress glowing unnaturally under the dim lights. Everyone was staring, their faces hollow and featureless, and Sarah, she was laughing. Laughing in a way that sent shivers down my spine. I bolted upright in bed, screaming loud enough to wake the dead. Sarah was out of the room in a flash, her footsteps thundering down the hallway. Moments later, she burst back in, her eyes wide and frantic. What happened?" she demanded, her voice shaking. It took me a moment to realize I was awake. My chest heaved as I struggled to catch my breath. Then, without thinking, I let out a nervous laugh. "Just a dream," I said, wiping the sweat from my brow. "It was just a scary dream." Her panic melted into anger, but I could still see the fear lingering in her eyes. "Oh shit, you scared me," she exclaimed, clutching her chest. "I didn't hear anything, and then suddenly you were screaming like that." I muttered another apology and lay back down, my heart still hammering against my ribs. Sarah grumbled something under her breath and climbed back into bed, but I couldn't bring myself to fall asleep again. When the first rays of sunlight filtered through the curtains, I was already awake. When I got up, Sarah was already dressed. She stood in front of the mirror, meticulously fixing her hair, her white dress draped over her shoulders like a shroud. "You're up early," I said groggily, heading to the bathroom to wash my face. "I didn't sleep much after your performance last night," she replied, her tone sharp but tinged with amusement. By the time I was ready to get dressed, Sarah was already putting on her shoes. I opened my wardrobe, pulled out my only suit, and immediately felt my stomach sink. The jacket was snug in all the wrong places, and the pants stopped just above my ankles. I turned to Sarah, hoping she wouldn't notice, but her reaction was immediate. "You didn't try it on yesterday?" she yelled, throwing her hands in the air. "How are you going to go like this? You look ridiculous." I sighed, scratching the back of my neck. "I still have my grandfather's old suit," I offered weakly. She raised an eyebrow. "Your grandfather's suit? Really? It's better than nothing," I muttered, already pulling it from the back of the closet. The suit was a relic of another era, complete with oversized lapels and a pattern that screamed 90s chic. It was also 3 sizes too big. I rolled up the sleeves, cinched the waist as best as I could, and turned to face Sarah. She doubled over with laughter, clutching her stomach. "Oh my God," she said between gasps. "This is perfect. You'll be the star of the show." My face burned with embarrassment, but I had no other option. I buttoned up the jacket, rolled my eyes at Sarah's continued giggling, and resigned myself to my fate. When we arrived at the wedding, the scene was like something out of a movie. The guests were dressed to the nines, their designer suits and glittering gowns putting my grandfather's monstrosity to shame. I felt every pair of eyes on me as we walked toward Lisa and her groom. Lisa looked radiant, her smile as wide as ever. She greeted us warmly, her arms outstretched as though nothing had ever gone wrong between her and Sarah. "I'm so happy you both came," she said, her voice dripping with sincerity. She turned to Sarah, her expression softening. "And Sarah, I hope you've forgotten about our past. I'm so sorry for everything." Sarah's face was a mask of calm, her smile polite but cold. Without a word, she pulled the envelope from her clutch and handed it to Lisa. Lisa's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, as if she'd expected Sarah to say something, anything. But Sarah simply nodded, her smile unchanging, and walked past Lisa without another glance. I followed her inside, my oversized suit swishing awkwardly with each step. As we moved through the crowd, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Sarah was too composed, too quiet. She didn't say a word as we found our seats, her eyes scanning the room with a calculated precision that made my stomach churn. Whatever she was planning, I wasn't sure I wanted to find out. The house was grand, almost intimidating. Its sprawling halls and high ceilings seemed to echo with the voices and laughter of the guests who roamed freely, drinks in hand. My wife, Sarah, seemed in her element. She had already spotted a handful of familiar faces, and as we walked, her demeanor softened into something I hadn't seen in months. She was relaxed, confident even, as she laughed and chatted with a group of old friends. "Go ahead," she said, barely glancing at me. "Look around. I'll catch up with you later." Her casual dismissal stung more than I cared to admit, but I nodded and wandered off, hoping the lavish surroundings would distract me from my own discomfort. As I strolled through the corridors, admiring the intricate molding and tasteful decor, I felt someone fall in a step beside me. I turned to see a man in his early 30s, sharply dressed and carrying an air of authority. "When are you starting?" he asked, his tone light but expectant. "Starting what?" I asked, bewildered. He frowned slightly, glancing at me as though I'd lost my mind. "The toast," he said. "You're the toastmaster, aren't you?" Heat rushed to my face. "No, I'm not," I stammered, the words tumbling out awkwardly. He raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. Oh, my mistake. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, mortified. The encounter left me rattled. The thought that I'd been mistaken for some kind of wedding entertainment made me feel like even more of an outsider than I already was. Desperate for a sense of security, I made my way back to Sarah. I found her exactly where I'd left her, surrounded by a new group of acquaintances. She was laughing, her eyes bright with something that looked suspiciously like joy. It was a stark contrast to the tension she'd carried in the days leading up to the wedding. For a moment, I let myself relax. Maybe this was what she needed, a chance to reconnect with old friends, to leave behind whatever grudge she'd held against Lisa. But just as the thought crossed my mind, Lisa herself appeared. She approached us with her boyfriend, Thomas, in tow. Lisa looked radiant, her smile broad as she greeted us. But Sarah's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a flicker of something cold and unreadable passing over her face. Lisa was all charm and grace as she introduced Thomas. I shook his hand, trying not to think about how much better his tailored suit looked compared to my oversized relic. Then Lisa turned to Sarah, her smile softening into something more contrite. "Sarah," she said, her voice low and apologetic, "I'm so sorry if you're still upset about the old days." Sarah stiffened beside me, but her smile stayed frozen in place. "I really didn't mean to take your beloved husband away from you," Lisa continued, her tone breezy in a way that felt almost cruel. "He was the one who hit on me, you know. And, to be honest, I don't think he loved you very much back then. He was sweet, but, well, he wasn't very bright. That's why I left him." My eyes darted to Sarah, whose expression remained unsettlingly calm. For a moment, I thought she might explode, shout, cry, or storm off in a rage. But instead, she simply tilted her head, her smile tightening ever so slightly. "It's okay," she said, her voice steady. "I've already forgotten about it." Lisa blinked, clearly surprised by Sarah's composed response. After an awkward pause, she excused herself and walked off with Thomas, leaving us alone. I turned to Sarah, watching her carefully. Her smile was gone now, replaced by a stony mask. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the nearest server, who was balancing a tray of drinks. Before I could say anything, she grabbed 3 shots of clear liquid and downed them in rapid succession, one after the other. "Sarah," I said, my voice low and cautious. She ignored me, setting the last empty glass back on the tray with a sharp clink. I stood there stunned. Sarah rarely drank, and when she did, it was always in moderation. This was something else entirely, something reckless and uncharacteristic. She met my gaze, her eyes flashing with something I couldn't quite name. Anger? Defiance? Whatever it was, it made my chest tighten with unease. For the first time that evening, I wondered if coming to this wedding had been a mistake. The reception was in full swing, the energy in the room electric. Guests filled the dance floor, the DJ spinning an upbeat mix that seemed to bring out the wild side of even the most reserved attendees. Sarah tugged on my arm, her cheeks flushed, her breath tinged with the sharp scent of vodka. "Come on," she said, her voice bright and insistent. "Let's dance." I hesitated for a moment, glancing around at the other couples who moved effortlessly to the rhythm. But Sarah's excitement was contagious, and I found myself nodding. We made our way to the dance floor, and for a while, everything was perfect. Her laugh was carefree, her movements fluid as she spun and swayed to the beat. It had been so long since I'd seen her this happy, this alive, and I couldn't help but smile as I held her close. But as the songs changed and the drinks flowed, Sarah's energy took on a different edge. She started jumping up and down, her arms flailing wildly as she shouted at the top of her lungs. "This is the best wedding ever," she screamed, her voice echoing above the music. People turned to look, some laughing, others wearing expressions of mild concern. I tried to steady her, my hands on her shoulders, but she shrugged me off, spinning in a dizzy circle and nearly crashing into a nearby couple. "Sarah," I said, leaning in close so she could hear me over the music. "Maybe we should take a break." She ignored me, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "I want to dance with Thomas," she declared, pointing across the room to Lisa's fiancé. The words hit me like a slap, but before I could respond, she added, "And you should dance with Lisa." I opened my mouth to protest, but Sarah was already pulling me toward them, her steps unsteady and her grin wide. When we reached them, she turned to Lisa, her face glowing with drunken enthusiasm. "Lisa," she said, her words slurring slightly, "I think my husband wants to dance with you." Lisa raised an eyebrow, her eyes flicking over my ill-fitting suit with barely disguised disdain. "I'd rather not," she said, her voice cold. "I wouldn't want him spilling something on my dress." The remark stung, and I felt my face grow hot. I muttered something unintelligible and stepped back, humiliated. Sarah, however, seemed unbothered. "Thomas," she called out, grabbing his hand and dragging him toward the dance floor. "Come on." I stood there awkwardly, watching as Sarah and Thomas began to move to the music. She was wild, her laughter loud and uninhibited as she twirled around him, her movements erratic and exaggerated. I tried to focus on her joy, telling myself that this was just the alcohol, that she was just having fun. "She's incredible," I murmured to myself, a small smile tugging at my lips. "I'm so lucky to have her." But then it happened. Sarah leaned in close to Thomas, her hands on his face, and pressed her cheek against his. From where I stood, it looked like she was kissing him. My heart stopped, my breath catching in my throat. And then Sarah shouted, her voice ringing out across the dance floor. "Thomas, what are you doing? Why did you kiss me?" The room went still, the music suddenly feeling too loud against the heavy silence. Lisa, standing just a few feet away, turned sharply, her eyes narrowing as they locked onto her fiancé. "What?" Lisa demanded, her voice rising. "Thomas, are you stupid?" She stormed over, her face a mix of fury and disbelief. When she saw the faint smear of lipstick on Thomas's cheek, the same shade Sarah was wearing, her expression darkened. "You kissed her?" Lisa shrieked, her voice shaking with rage. Thomas threw up his hands in protest. "I didn't. She did it. She grabbed me." Sarah gasped, clutching her chest like she was the victim. "What are you talking about?" "You kissed me." The argument escalated quickly, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of accusations. Guests began to gather, their curious whispers filling the gaps between shouts. "Sarah, stop lying." Thomas yelled, his face red. "I'm not lying." Sarah shot back, tears welling in her eyes. "You leaned in first." Lisa was hysterical now, her hands flying as she pointed at both of them. "I can't believe this." On my wedding day, I stood frozen, my mind racing to process what I'd just witnessed. Sarah, my wife, had just caused a scene so outrageous that even the onlookers seemed unsure of how to react. I wanted to intervene, to say something that would defuse the situation, but the words wouldn't come. All I could do was watch as the chaos unfolded, the foundation of the evening cracking beneath the weight of Sarah's drunken antics. And deep down, a small voice whispered a truth I wasn't ready to face. I no longer knew the woman I had married. The shouting had turned into a frenzy. Lisa, shaking with fury, had insisted on checking the surveillance footage. The moment the recording played back on the screen, everything came into sharp focus. Sarah grabbing Thomas, pulling him close, and planting her face against his in a drunken, deliberate act. Lisa's jaw dropped, and her face turned beet red. Without a word, she hurled the closest object, a centerpiece filled with flowers and water, at Sarah, soaking her white dress. "You're unbelievable," Lisa screamed, her voice trembling with rage. "How dare you do this at my wedding?" A ripple of shock ran through the crowd. All eyes turned to Sarah, whose face twisted into a defiant sneer. "Oh, don't even start, Lisa," Sarah shouted, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "You're acting like a spoiled child. Maybe if your dress wasn't the cheapest thing on the rack, you wouldn't be throwing such a tantrum." The room gasped. "And your hair?" Sarah continued, gesturing wildly. "God, who styled it? A blind person? I'm doing you a favor, Lisa. This wedding was a disaster before I even got here. And your fiancé? He doesn't even know how to kiss." Lisa's face contorted in fury, and the room erupted into chaos. Guests were yelling, trying to calm them both down, but Sarah wasn't done. She grabbed a glass from a nearby table and threw it against the wall, the shatter sending shards skittering across the floor. "Sarah, stop!" I yelled, stepping forward, but she was beyond reason. Her hands found the edge of the main wedding table, the one covered with pristine linens and laden with a three-tiered cake, glasses of champagne, and carefully arranged decorations. With a single, reckless motion, she flipped the entire thing over, sending food, drinks, and the cake crashing to the floor. That was the last straw. Lisa stood frozen, her hands shaking, before her voice turned ice cold. "You've ruined everything, Sarah. Everything. And you," she spat, turning to me, "are just as bad. Look at you. What are you even wearing? Who comes to a wedding looking like a clown? Aren't you ashamed of yourself? Doesn't your wife care that you look like a joke?" I opened my mouth to respond, to defend myself, but before I could speak, Sarah stepped forward, her face a storm of defiance. "Don't you dare talk about my husband," she screamed. "He's twice the man your pathetic fiancé will ever be." The room erupted again, voices rising as people shouted at Sarah, at me, at each other. Lisa was trembling, tears of rage streaming down her face. "Get out," she screamed. "Get out of my wedding, both of you. You've ruined everything." As the shouting continued, Sarah did something that made the room fall silent in shock. She marched over to the videographer's setup, grabbed the camera that had been capturing the entire event, and smashed it against the floor. The silence was deafening. You destroyed the footage?" Lisa's voice cracked with disbelief. Sarah turned to her, her lips curling into a cruel smile. "Now no one will remember your perfect day. That was it." The guests surged toward us, their voices filled with anger and accusations. I grabbed Sarah by the arm, dragging her toward the exit as the crowd shouted and cursed at us. We stumbled out into the parking lot, and I shoved her into the car. My hands were shaking as I started the engine, the sound of the tires screeching against the pavement as we sped away. The car ride home was a blur of shouting and accusations. "What the hell were you thinking?" I yelled, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "What is wrong with you, Sarah?" She was crying now, her voice breaking as she tried to defend herself. "You think I could just forget what Lisa did to me? After everything she stole from me, I had to do it. I had to take revenge." "Revenge? You humiliated both of us. Do you even realize what you've done?" She sobbed harder, her words tumbling out in a chaotic rush. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I just wanted her to feel what I felt. And Thomas, I didn't mean to kiss him. It was stupid, and I'm sorry." "Sorry?" I shouted. "You're sorry now? After you've ruined their wedding, destroyed their memories, and dragged me into this mess?" She wiped at her tears, her hands shaking. "I know I was wrong, but Lisa deserved it. And you're still here, aren't you? That's all that matters. Please just forgive me." I slammed my hand against the steering wheel. "This isn't just about forgiveness, Sarah. This is about who you've become. I don't even know you anymore." The air in the car was thick with tension, our voices echoing as we hurled blame and anger at each other. I knew this argument wasn't going to end here, and as the city lights blurred past the window, I made a decision I never thought I'd have to make. When we were leaving, my wife cried and apologized repeatedly. To be honest, I was holding a grudge against her because she ruined our life. Then I realized that we shouldn't go home, but rather go to my grandfather's house, so I did. We lived there for a month. My wife cried every day and apologized for it, and I forgave her. We moved to a new city in New York, and now we live here. It's been 5 months since then, and we are doing well, and Lisa is not doing so well, because after that she had another wedding, and a month ago, she divorced Thomas.